Hi everyone and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote, "Never be fearful about what you're doing when it is right." From the American civil rights movement activist Rosa Parks. A brief review of the last part where we continued our discussion on a difficult ending, two rooks and pawns, and then concluded chapter 5 after discussing the topic Rook, Bishop and Pawns versus Rook, Knight and Pawns. Later we begin chapter 6 and discuss the topic Some Salient Points about Pawns. So now moving further into the book, Capablanca begins the next topic under the heading number 32, Some Possible Developments from Ruy Lopez. He writes that some of the variations in the openings and the maneuvers in the middle game are often based on some of the elementary principles just expounded can be easily seen in the following case. Example 65. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, A6, Bishop A4, Knight F6. Castles, Knight takes E4, D4, D5, Bishop B3, D5, D takes E5, Bishop E6, C3, Bishop E7, Rook E1, Knight C5, Bishop C2, Bishop G4, Knight D2, Castles, Knight B3, and Knight E6. So far, a very well-known variation of the Ruy Lopez. In fact, they are the moves of the Janoski-Lasker game in Paris, 1912. Queen D3 and G6. Let us suppose the game went on and that in some way White, by playing one of the knights to D4 at the proper time, forced the exchange of both knights. And then afterwards both the bishops were exchanged, and we arrived at some such position as shown on board. I obtained such a position in a very similar way once at Lord's in Poland. I was playing the white pieces against a consulting team headed by Salve. Now we would have here the case of the backward c-pawn, which will in no way be able to advance to c5. Such a position may be said to be theoretically lost, and in practice a first-class master will invariably win it from or against black. If I may be excused the reference, I will say that I won the game above referred to. After a few moves, the position may easily be thus. The black pieces can be said to be fixed. If a white plays queen c3, black must answer queen d7, otherwise they will lose a pawn. And if a white returns with the queen to a3, black will again have to return to b7 with the queen or lose a pawn. Thus, black can only move according to white's lead, and under such conditions, white can easily advance with their pawns to f4 and g4 until black will be forced to stop f5 by playing f5, and we might finally have some such position as this. Example 66. In this situation, the game might go on as follows: G takes f5, G takes f5, Queen f3, and Queen d7. White threatened to win a pawn by Queen takes d5, and black could not play Rook f8. because rook takes c6 would also win a pawn at least. So queen d7, rook c2, rook g6, rook g2, king h8, rook g1, rook g8, queen h5, rook takes g2, rook takes g2, rook takes g2, king takes g2, queen g7 check, king h2, queen g6, queen takes g6, h takes g6, b4, and white wins. Now suppose that in the position on board it were black's move and they played rook f8. White would then simply defend their f-pawn by some move like queen f3, threatening rook takes c6, and then white would bring their king up to g3, and when the time came, break through as in the previous case. White might even be able to obtain the following position. Black would now be forced to play rook c8, and white could then play queen c2 and follow it up with king f3, and thus force black to play f takes g4, which would give white a greater advantage. A careful examination of all these positions will reveal that besides the advantage of freedom of maneuver on white's part, the power of the pawn at e5 is enormous, and that it is the commanding position of this pawn and the fact that it is free to advance once all the pieces are exchanged that constitute the pivot of all white's maneuvers. I have purposely given positions without the moves which lead to them so that the student may become accustomed to build up in their own mind possible positions that may arise out of any given situation. Thus, they will learn to make strategical plans and be on their way to the master class. The student can derive enormous benefit by further practice of this kind. Moving further, Capablanca begins the next topic under the heading number 33, the influence of a hole. He writes, the influence of a so-called hole in a game already been illustrated in my game against Blanco, page 81, where has been shown the influence exercised by the different pieces posted in the hole created at e5. Example 67. In order to further illustrate this point, I now give a game played in the Havana International Masters Tournament of 1913. Queen's Gambit declined. White, D. Janoski. Black, A. Kupchik. D4, D5, C4, E6, Knight C3, Knight F6. Bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, knight d7, bishop d3, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and knight b6. Of course, this idea is to post a knight at d5, but as it is the other knight which will be posted there, this maneuver does not seem logical. The knight at b6 does nothing except to prevent the development of their own queen's bishop. The normal course, castles, followed by c5 is more reasonable. For a beautiful illustration of how to play white in that variation, See the Janoski-Rubinstein game of the St. Petersburg tournament of 1914. So, knight b6 and bishop d3. Bishop b3 has some points in its favor in this position. The most important being the possibility of advancing the e-pawn immediately after knight d5. Bishop takes e7 and queen takes e7. But bishop d3 was played in the game and play continued with knight d5. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7 and knight f3. Had white's bishop been at b3, he could now play e4 instead of knight f3, as indicated in the previous note, a move which he cannot make in the present position because of knight f4, threatening not only the g-pawn but also knight takes d3 check. As white's king's bishop should never be exchanged in this opening without a very good reason, white therefore cannot play e4. So, knight f3, castles, castles, bishop d7 and rook c1. White is perfectly developed and now threatens to win a pawn as follows. Knight takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, followed by rook takes c7. c6. The fact that black is practically forced to make this move in order to avoid the loss of a pawn is sufficient reason in itself to condemn the whole system of development on black's part. In effect, he plays bishop d7 and now he has to shut off the action of his own bishop, which thereby becomes little more than a pawn for a while. In fact, it is hard to see how this bishop will ever be able to attack anything. Besides, it can be easily seen that white will soon post his two knights at e5 and c5, respectively, and that black will not be able to dislodge them without seriously weakening his game, if he can do it at all. From all these reasons, it can be gathered that it would probably have been better for black to play knight takes c3 and thus get rid of one of the two white knights before assuming such a defensive position. In such cases, the less number of pieces on the board, the better chances there are to escape. So c6, knight e4 and f5. This practically amounts to committing suicide since it creates a hole at e5 for white's knight, from where it will be practically impossible to dislodge them. If black intended to make such a move, he should have done it before, when at least there would have been an object in preventing the white knight from reaching c5. Knight c5, bishop e8 and knight e5. The position of white's knights, especially the one at e5, might be said to be ideal, and a single glance shows how they dominate the position. The question henceforth will be, how is white going to derive the full benefit from such an advantageous situation? This we shall soon see. Rook b8. There is no object in this move unless it is to be followed by knight d7. As that is not the case, he might have gone with the rook to c8, as he does later. Rook e1, rook f6, queen f3, rook h6, queen g3 and rook c8. White threatened to win the exchange by playing either knight f7 or knight g4. So rook c8, f3, rook c7, a3, king h8 and h3. Perhaps all these precautions are unnecessary, but White feels that he has more than enough time to prepare his attack and wants to be secure in every way before he begins. g5, e4, f4, queen f2 and knight e3. He had better have played knight f6 and tried later on to get rid of White's knights by means of knight d7. So knight e3 and rook takes e3. With this sacrifice of the rook for a knight and pawn, White obtains an overwhelming position. F takes e3, queen takes e3 and knight c8. Knight d7 was better in order to get rid of one of the two white knights. There were, however, any number of good replies to it. Among them the following: knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, queen takes g5, queen takes g5, knight f7 check, king g7, knight takes g5, and with two pawns for the exchange and the position so much in his favor, White should have no trouble in winning. So knight c8, knight g4, rook g6, e5, rook g7, bishop c4 and bishop f7. All these moves are practically forced, and as it is easily seen, they tie up Black's position more and more. White's maneuvers from move 24 onwards are highly instructive. Knight f6 and knight b6. This wandering knight has done nothing throughout the game. Knight e4, h6, h4, knight d5, queen d2, rook g6, h takes g5 and queen f8. If instead h takes g5, king f2 and Black would be helpless. So queen f8, f4, knight e7, g4, h takes g5 and f takes g5, where Black resigned the game. There is nothing to be done. If bishop g8, queen h2 check, king g7 and bishop takes e6. The student should notice that apart from other things, White throughout the game has had control of the Black squares, principally those at e5 and c5. From now on to the end of the book, I shall give a collection of my games, both lost and won, chosen so as to serve as illustrations of the general principles laid down in the foregoing pages. With this, Capablanca concludes part 1 of the book. Well done on making it so far in the book with me. Kappa begins part 2 of the book, Illustrative Games, starting off with Game 1. He writes, Game 1, Queen's Gambit declined, match 1909. White, F. J. Marshall. Black, J. R. Capablanca. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, and knight e4. I had played this defense twice before in the match with good results, and although I lost this game, I still played it until the very last game when I changed my tactics. The reason was my total lack of knowledge of the different variations in this opening, coupled with the fact that I knew that Dr. E. Lasker had been successful with it against Marshall himself in 1907. I thought that since Dr. Lasker had played it so often, it should be good. The object is to exchange a couple of pieces and at the same time to bring about a position full of possibilities and with promising chances of success once the endgame stage is reached. On general principles, it should be wrong because the same knight is moved 3 times in the opening. Although it involves the exchange of 2 pieces, in reality, the difficulty in this variation, as well as in nearly all the variations of the Queen's Gambit, lies in the slow development of Black's Queen's Bishop. However, whether this variation can or cannot be safely played is a question still to be decided, and it is outside the scope of this book. I may add that at present my preference is for a different system of development, but it is not unlikely that I should sometime come back to this variation. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and bishop d3. C takes d5 instead is preferable for reasons that we shall soon see. So bishop d3, knight takes c3, b takes c3, and knight d7. Now d takes c4 would be a better way to develop the game. The idea is that after bishop takes c4 and b6, followed by bishop b7, would give Black's bishop a powerful range. For this variation, see the 11th game of the match. So knight d7, knight f3, and castles. No longer would d takes c4, bishop takes c4 and b6 be good, because bishop b5 would prevent bishop b7 on account of knight e5. So castles, c takes d5, e takes d5, queen b3, knight f6, a4, and c5, played with the intention of obtaining the majority of pawns on the queen side. Yet it is doubtful whether this move is good, since it leaves Black's queenside pawns disrupted in a way. The safe course would have been to play c6. So c5, queen a3, and b6. This exposes Black to further attack by a5, without any compensation for it. If I had to play this position nowadays, I would simply play rook e8. Then after queen takes c5, queen takes c5 would follow, and I believe that Black would regain the pawn. If instead white played d takes c5 here, then bishop g4 would give Black an excellent game. So b6, a5, bishop b7, castles, queen c7, Rook b1 and knight d7. Black's position was barred and perhaps lost in any case, but the text move makes matters worse. As a matter of fact, I never saw White's reply bishop f5. It never even passed through my mind that this was threatened. Black's best move would have been rook f b8. If that loses, then any other move would lose as well. So knight d7, bishop f5 and rook c8. From barred to worse. Knight f6 offered the only hope. So rook c8, bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, a6, bishop c6, d takes c5, b takes c5, queen takes c5, rook b8. The game was lost. One move was as good as another. Rook takes b8, rook takes b8, knight e5, queen f5, f4, rook b6, and queen takes b6, where black resigned the game. Of course, knight takes c6 question mark and rook b1 check would have drawn. The text move queen takes b6 is pretty and finishes quickly. A well-played game on Marshall's part. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent child support. Several new supporters: Chess Dexter, the Juju Beast, and GM's Perfect. Chess Dexter is also a fellow chess streamer on Twitch. I will post a link to his stream in the video description. Do check him out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.